Alright, today we are going to be drawing the chisel, or modeling the chisel I should say. This is essentially composed of three main moves here. One is to draw the front view of the chisel, which is really the hardest part. It's comprised of quite a bit of layout, and interpreting the dimensions is honestly the hardest part. And then we're going to cut this taper into the chisel. We're going to remove some material over here. And then last, we're going to add this rounded portion on at the end. It's because the dimensions are derived from this edge instead of the very end of the chisel. It's actually a lot easier to add this on at the end than it is to try and incorporate that at the beginning. So let's look at our drawing. So I've added a few lines here. I'm going to remove them temporarily if I can. Alright, so this is our original drawing of our chisel. A few things to note here. Number one, this back portion here is called the shank. Again, a chisel is meant to be driven with a hammer or a mallet struck on this end, and then the pointed end down here is where the cutting action happens. So this back portion here is called the shank of the chisel. It's essentially the handle portion. It's what you would grip with your hand or with a pair of pliers or something like that. Because of that, this is kind of made from like a standard bar stock. So we would assume that if it's half an inch here, it's also half an inch tall. So the reason why we have to kind of assess that right away is we want to know that, what our height is here, because we know the length of this portion is 2.5 up until this 3/4 of an inch where it sort of flares out here. But we don't know the height until we make that assumption. So we know that this section is half an inch tall by 2.5 inches long. If we kind of forget the curve, the radius here for now. This section, the point section, starts at 3/4 of an inch tall by half an inch in depth, and it moves down, and it gets down to 5/16 of an inch here. And then 1/4 of an inch later, it comes to a point. And then at this point where it's 5/16 is also 1/4 of an inch in depth, whereas it's half an inch in depth here. So we've got some amount of tapering going on in our depth as well as the height. We need to identify where does that taper happen on the depth side. One thing to note here is that on this entire surface, there is no sharp line to indicate that the taper would start there. So this is one big flat surface. If we look at our chisel in 3D, we can sort of indicate that. We can see the tapers on the back side here. This is our original orientation. We can see that this is one flat surface. So we're going to keep it that way. We're going to keep that one flat surface. If we look from the top, we can see the taper comes down here on the back and then straightens out for that last 1/4 of an inch section. Now that we've got kind of the basic concept here, how are we going to build this? Let's look in AutoCAD just before we get building in OnShape. One thing we're going to do is we're going to start with a center line, a construction line down the middle. We're going to draw that 2.5 inches. And then what we will do is once we have that 2.5 inch line drawn, we're going to symmetrically draw a 3/4 of an inch line right at the end of it. It's actually easier to do in OnShape than it is in AutoCAD because we can use the dimensions to sort of move it around. But essentially we're creating this point and that point by drawing this line. Then we'll continue on down. How far? We're going to continue this line from here. We could continue down 2 inches to the point. However, we have these other 2 points here that are 5/16 of an inch apart. So it actually pays for us to sort of stop here, draw our vertical 5/16 line, and then kind of continue on, much like we did for a 3/4 of an inch line. So how far is that? Well, if the total length is 2 inches remaining, and we're removing 1/4 of an inch, that leaves us with 1.75. So we'll do that. Then we're going to draw in our 5/16 tall line. Again, this would be symmetrical about the center line, so it would be 5 30-seconds above and 5 30-seconds below. And then just to flesh out the point here, we would go 1/4 of an inch longer. So then if we were to only have the green lines as skeletons, so to speak, we would be able to trace at least the front half of this, the point portion of it, almost like connect the dots. We'd start here, go to here, go to here, go to here, go to here. That's exactly what we're going to do in OnShape. Let's go back. We'll create a new document. Call it Chisel. And we're going to start drawing right on our front plane here, new sketch. And we're going to draw all those green lines that we drew in AutoCAD, we're going to draw as construction lines here in OnShape. And I just find if we line everything up at the center point, that'll just make life easy. So we're going to click on construction and line, because we're drawing a construction line. We're going to kind of line up with our center point there so it turns gold. And we'll just draw a rough line there. We'll dimension it to 2.5. Again, we're breaking the line up at each of these major changes in height. And we'll draw a vertical construction line. Again, we want to click line and construction each time we do this. Right at the end of our line that we drew there. Again, I'm getting it close. We're not being perfect about this, and just dimension it to 3/4 of an inch. Now, this is not symmetrical. This distance down here is not the same as this. So we need to tell it from the end of the line to our kind of center line here is half of 3/4. So half of 3/4 is 3/8. That'll center that up. We'll draw another construction line. Remember we said 1.75, so we'll just draw that out and we'll dimension it. 1.75. We're going to repeat that same process we used for the 3/4 of an inch line down here, except our line is only 5/16 tall. So again, line, construction, hover over the end so we get that little indicator here. We'll dimension it, 5/16. And we're going to work again from the end to our center line. It's going to be half of 5/16 is 5 30-seconds. We're just doubling the bottom number of the fraction. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to do is just kind of extend our construction line again. Again, make sure we're clicking construction. That's important. We're going to extend it out to 1/4 of an inch. Okay. Now we have our skeleton kind of built here. Now we can start drawing this thing out. So let's draw the front. So we'll go line, and like I said, we're just connecting these points up. Nothing terribly difficult. Make sure that everything's touching here. All these points look good. All right. And now I'm just going to temporarily finish the sketch just so you can see what we have. So we've got just the front kind of outlined here, and then we're going to do our 1/2 inch by 2.5 inch rectangle on the back, but it's got to be centered up height-wise. 1/4 of an inch above, 1/4 of an inch below. We'll just edit our sketch. So what I like to do is just sort of start here. We'll just draw up a little bit and draw over, connect things up. We'll draw a little bit down and a little bit over. And we just dimension it. From here to here, 1/4 of an inch. Here to here, 1/4 of an inch. And everything is pretty well defined here. We're going to finish our sketch again just so we can kind of analyze this without the dimensions being in the way. A few things to note here. Number one, notice the interior of our shape has not gotten darker, and that's because we haven't filled in these gaps here. Yes, the construction line is there, but they don't count for closing in our profile. We need to put the curved portions in next, and that'll close up our profile when we do both of those. So let's do that. Edit. Now, how big are these curves? Or what do we know about the curves? Let's start with that. We know the curves are 3/4 of an inch in radius and we know that they are tangent to our shank, and they touch the 3/4 of an inch height portion, so they're coincident with it if we want to use proper terms. Let's draw our circles. Okay, let's draw 2. Why not? We'll dimension both of them. They're going to be 1.5 because they're 3/4 inch radius. Again, remember, radius and diameter, important to make the distinction. And then we're going to select tangent, and we know that this circle is tangent to this line. We also know that this circle is coincident with that point, the point right where the 3/4 mark is. And now we can just come in with our trim tool and clean this up. Just take out that little section of line. Now you can see we've got this nice transition. We'll do the same thing here. So tangent first, and then coincident. And then again, come in with our trim tool and clean this up. All right, we are ready to extrude. You see we've got a darkened in profile here. Again, our depth is going to be 1/2 inch. So we will click extrude, select our profile. Let's do this symmetrically, why not? 1/2 inch. Okay. Next, we need to remove some material on the back so we can get to that tapered section here. So in order to do that, we need a profile, a plane that we can draw on. And right now, there's no flat surface that's on the top, any number of issues, so it's easy enough for me to just offset this plane up. So we'll click plane. We're going to switch it to plane point. We're going to click a point, which is right on the top. We're going to click a plane that's parallel to how we want to draw. So right there, you can see we've created this plane right at the top of our chisel. We'll accept that. We're going to draw it right on plane 1 here, new sketch, view normal to that surface, and then we can draw in our taper. Now, to draw in our taper, we're going to click the Use button. We're going to use the edge where it's 3/4 of an inch, and the edge where it's 5/16. We want both of those edges, so we're going to look back normal to that. And we're just going to connect those points here. So from here, we're going to come down right to the midpoint. That gives us our 1/4 inch in depth here. And we're just going to come straight out from there. Doesn't really matter where we put these last 3 lines, 3 points I should say. So something like that. And we will finish our sketch. And now we can cut and remove that material. Go to extrude, we'll click on remove, we'll select our profile. You see it's giving us a red error here. We're just going to click merge with all. Now we can see it wants to remove that material, and there we go. That looks good. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add our rounded end here, which if we look at the dimension of that, that's 5/8 in diameter. So we're going to click right on that surface, new sketch, look normal to it. We're going to click Use again. We want to grab this edge and use that as part of our sketch. We'll come in with our center point circle here. We'll just draw a circle out here. We'll dimension it to 5/8 of an inch. Okay, and we're just going to drag our circle kind of over top of about where we want it to go. We'll use the coincident constraints to tell it the circle is coincident with that corner. And we'll do that again here. Circle coincident with that corner. See, it snaps into place. Use the trim tool to remove most of it. And we can finish our sketch. Extrude it. We are adding material this time. We'll select our profile. Flip it around. And then we're just going 1/2 inch. Okay, our chisel is done. So again, this is our kind of our starting view here, and we're going to look at the top. We can see the taper down to 1/4 of an inch here from 1/2 inch, so that's why we're right on that midline there. And we've got our 5/8 round down at the bottom.